Just throw it up. Thor's hammer.
All right, welcome. This is a work session of the Assembly to discuss AO 2019-25, an ordinance establishing a misdemeanor offense for the removal of identification marks for unlawful possession under Entered Municipal Code, deleting the existing minor offense of alteration and mutilation, the serial number registration, clarifying the property on which identification marks have been removed must be presumed stolen by licensed pawnbrokers within the municipality. So, many of you are around. I already have questions. Ms. Wimhoff.
Thank you, sir. Just removal of identification marks, removal of unlawful possessions.
Yeah, that's a section of the code. It's two things. First, it's removal of identification marks is one thing. But under the removal of the section of the code, there are some duplications in the code. And so we're taking a part of the code out. That's what they mean.
Okay.
It's not, they're two different things.
So it's not meant to be grammatically correct.
It is grammatically correct. It's talking about two different things. One is talking about an action of removing serial numbers, and one of them is talking about the removal of a section of the code.
Okay, so, and the unlawful possession. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understood it, I didn't
It's accurate. Mr. Change.
Chris, there's more people that process these type of goods than pawnbrokers. We have a whole category of secondhand merchants across Anchorage. So if you want to do this and make it effective, there's got to be more than just pawnbrokers. There's got to be secondhand merchants.
Like whom?
Oh heavens. There was one on the Diamond Mall that brought gold and diamonds and jewelry from homes that were burglarized in Anchorage, and they simply said they bought it and then immediately put it for sale. I had to write an ordinance saying with precious metals to deal with that. But there are other people that buy things in our pawn shops.
But how many are they all regulated? Are they licensed, like under the meeting?
Yeah.
They're all licensed and
They're
regulated?
licensed.
Interesting.
They were.
Mr. Wellington.
Playing against sports.
Right.
That's not a pawn shop, but they buy and sell lots of used bikes. And hoarding market would do the same.
Okay.
So there are others. It's a slippery slope, though.
There's a store called the Hoarding Market.
Yeah,
That's
that's
right
right here.
That's
It's a
awesome.
great shop. They use sports gear.
Really?
What do you mean a slippery slope?
Those trade was our pawn shops.
Well, this has been dealt with before, and I think it came through Mr. Training, but there's like businesses like mine, we buy old comics. Okay, do I have to sit on this for 30 days?
Cool.
Fine.
Right.
Because 30 days from now, no one cares. You know, so because the pawn shops have to hold things for a while.
Right, and this doesn't require that. This requires that
No,
if you have a bike without a serial number on it, you don't buy it.
And I'm totally there. We buy used video games, and there's no serial number. We're out.
Right.
So it's a slippery slope, but not inappropriate.
Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I was going to speak in defense of just using pawnbrokers for now. I think, first of all, try not to let the enemy do the perfect the enemy the good. But also, I do think there is a sort of uniqueness to the economy of pawnbrokers. It's a little bit different from the Bosco's Commons and environments of the world.
Okay, Mr. Train.
You said bikes. Does every bike that's made have a serial number on it?
Pretty much, there is a limited bandwidth of bikes, very high-end bikes at this time, very high-end bikes, and they're uniquely identifiable by other features.
It pretty much sounds like the term slightly pregnant. So,
Almost universally.
but not everyone.
Everyone you could buy on the common market in Anchorage.
It's a serial number.
Yes. Yes. You would have to have it custom made for yourself and ask for it not to have a serial number. They would make it uniquely.
Okay. Have you talked to the pawnbroking industry about this ordinance?
No.
Okay.
That was tacked on by the legal department. It wasn't a concern of mine, but they brought it
I
up.
just want to let you know, as a person that's been around for a while,
Yeah.
good luck.
Okay.
You've never seen an industry quite as effective as pawnbrokers. I wish you luck.
Really?
Oh, we'll fill up the assembly chambers.
Why aren't they
It will
here?
turn out.
We'll find out on Tuesday night.
Why aren't they here? Yeah, I don't know why they're
I
not
thought
here.
like the retired people were affected, their lobby.
No, the plastic people.
There's a lot of them.
Tobacco?
Flowers.
Okay.
Flowers.
I just got lost.
Okay, so let's go through it. We're having a really nice roundabout conversation, but let's just talk about what we do here. And Jessica is here from the legal department to help in case I flub anything, because that is highly possible. But this is the second half, or excuse me, this is the first half of a previous effort that I tried to work on that had resounding public opposition, but this part is less oppositional. What we're intending to do here is state that bikes that have had the serial numbers removed or defaced are de facto assumed to be stolen. If you are running around with a bike that has had its number defaced, and they have also included other items than bikes, some pieces of equipment that are listed, and this is mirroring the state law. And so it's built on the same principle, except in order to keep peace with Mr. Traney and hope to have his vote, we removed firearms from the list. So we didn't exactly match the state's law.
Put them on, we'll ignore you. Keep going on.
So what we're doing here, if you go through the changes to the code, we are adding the removal of identification marks on a property of $50 or more. It's Class A misdemeanor. Under $50, Class B. And unlawful possession is Class A if it's over $50. Unlawful possession is Class B if it's under $50. We're also then removing, if you go to page 3, section 3 there, 938-190, it's unlawful for any person willfully and maliciously remove, destroy, mutilate, or alter the number of any bicycle frame licensed pursuant to this section. Nothing in this section shall prohibit the police department from stamping numbers on the frames. We no longer operate a licensing program, and so it's just a kind of a dead section of the code. And Ms. Wimhoff, this is where the removal comes in. We're removing that section of the code.
Oh,
So-
because I have one of those licenses from 1960s.
Right, we just don't do it anymore. And then, if you look to the back, licensee may not purchase or pawn an article if the consumer cannot provide proof of ownership. Property which lacks serial number or identification violation code should be presumed to have been stolen, embezzled, or otherwise illegally obtained for the purpose of this section. So, it's generally a reasonable approach, but what we wanted to do in this is create a method by which a person could, if they found themselves in possession of a bike that had a serial number removed, but they had some indicia of ownership, so they could prove that they got it in some way, they could then come to a municipal contractor or the police department and have the bike kind of remarked as legal, so that we would have a vehicle, a method for that to happen. And what this is really going after is people with piles of bikes that were unable to assert that they have gained them illegally, and who are able to state under the law that those bikes are theirs because they're in possession of them, and we cannot prove otherwise. Mr. Traney.
May I ask you a question, Chris? I appreciate you trying to do this. Have you talked to the police department on this?
Oh, yes.
Because they have one person that handles pawn shops.
We've sat quite at length going over this.
Let's say I own an auction company and I get furniture in. They're by definition appliance. I'd have to go make sure that every serial number's not been defaced from it, or what?
I don't know, the furniture has serial numbers on them.
Well, you have appliances on here.
But furniture, I don't
Refrigerator,
know.
freezers.
That is one area. I would be happy if we stripped all that other stuff out and just left the bikes, but the administration, the legal department added that in, and I think it's reasonable to have it. So
I just want to make sure, Chris, it can actually be enforced.
It's really intended to be enforced in egregious cases. Mr.
Well,
Wayne.
about the intent you go in, but not that I find this unreasonable.
Yep.
So now these changes, you said all of these changes parallel state law. Does this last 50 years parallel state law?
Actually, that part I don't know. What I meant parallel to state law was the list of items that were considered under the removal of serial numbers, because the state law has a similar provision.
The state law doesn't have a negligent possession provision, does it?
Yes.
It does.
I can look up the state law real quickly, I don't have it in front of me. If you'll excuse me, I'm on my,
So why,
here.
we just enforce the state law, why do we have to pass this?
Jessica?
give me one moment, I'll pull up the state law.
A clarification question?
Yes, please. Come back to Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this, this is numbers that were put on by the manufacturer or some licensing group. So let's say that in the 70s you had to get your bike licensed and they engraved it rather than gave you a paper thing.
Right.
But if you decided to put, this is my bike, this is Gretchen Wimhoff's bike, and somebody raced it, that's not a problem. Okay.
No.
Okay, just.
No, it really addresses legally applied, or not legally, but manufacturer applied. Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if somebody's got a whole pile of these bikes, then they're subject to a long list of these fines for each one of those illegal possessions, is that correct?
And potential imprisonment, right?
Yeah.
Plus up to a year in prison. Not that that is usually enforced, but in theory could be. Can I ask
Yeah,
you?
go ahead.
So I have an amendment that everybody should have a little copy of, and I need to ask questions of, I don't know if you guys, sorry Jessica, what's your last name again?
It's Jessica Gustin, and I don't have a copy of the amendment.
Yes.
But I can get a copy of the amendment.
Yes. So I have a question of the administration. And all of this might be moot if unlawful possession in this form is already in the state law. Then, so be it. But I'm curious what the notification process of law enforcement looks like. So if I'm going to notify law enforcement, do I just call them and say, my name's John Smith, I own a bike, there's no serial number? And if that's the case, then I can see why you have the and in there. But to me, if we say you have to affirmatively notify law enforcement, there must be some other part of that. You must be able to say, this is the kind of bike I have, and this is why, and this is why it's missing the serial number. So I want to change that and to or, because right now it is possible, because this doesn't just apply to bikes, it applies to a lot of things, but even with bikes, there are storage sheds all over Anchorage where I suspect there are some items that where the serial number has worn off or otherwise been destroyed. And if you have that and in there, then the person has to not only have the usual indicia of ownership, they have to also affirmatively go and tell the police. And I suspect that many of our neighbors will not do that, both because they don't know we passed this, and also because it's just not something we do. We don't go register everything we own with the police. And so I'm proposing we change that and to an or, so you could either go talk to the police and say, I own this thing, the serial number has been destroyed, or you have all the normal indicia of ownership, and so you are not presumed to have committed the offense of negligent possession, unlawful possession. And I think this amendment would not frustrate Chris's goals with this ordinance, because as you said, we're not going after that person with the storage
Who
shed.
has a receipt?
We're going after the people who have piles and piles of bicycles or other piles and piles of stolen goods, and they don't satisfy either. They both cannot notify law enforcement, and they're not going to, and they do not have the normal indicia of ownership. And so that's why I want to change that and to or.
And I disagree with that, only because all it would take is, it's a reiteration of the status quo. If you're out in a camp and the officer is coming up and there's a pile of bikes and the guy says, I'm notifying you, these are my bikes, they have effectively done that.
Well,
that's giving notice to the police that, hey, I'm reporting this bike doesn't have a serial number. And so you have effectively nullified
I don't
the
think
law
so.
that way.
You can't
Should
report
we
something.
be debating, just asking?
That's what I.
Well, I need to ask a question of the administration of what the process is for notification. Because if the process for notification is as simple as a police officer is now at my doorstep and I can say, oh yeah, these are not stolen goods, then okay, that's fine. It's ridiculous, but it's fine. But our notification process must be a little bit more, or I'm hoping to find out that our notification process is a little bit more involved.
Not as written.
Well, okay, so I will try to speak to the notification process and the number of things that were raised. Unfortunately, while APD was included in earlier conversations, they're not here to speak to specifics of what the notification process entails. The notification process is left open, if obviously not detailed in the code. So there would be some flexibility in terms of what would be required of APD. To backtrack in the conversation a bit, there is questions raised about the differences between the state and the proposed code. And the state code, very specifically, and I have it here in front of me, requires, there's removal of identification rights and unlawful possession, and there's two main differences. One, we've changed the intent under unlawful possession. You'll see that it's negligent possession. we're encouraging, to be fair, we're encouraging our citizens and residents, you know, to be aware of what they're getting involved with, their possessions, when they're entering the stream of commerce. Say they're selling something or buying something, that they should take reasonable care. Another change
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry, but what's the state, you think the state is strict liability? What's the state mens rea requirement?
Knowingly.
Okay, so that's higher than negligent. So that does cut towards my point, right?
Right,
We
strict liability.
have changed this to make it closer to strict liability because negligent is a lower standard than knowing.
Yeah.
So you have to know you're unlawfully possessed, you're possessing a stolen good in that case.
No, the police have to prove you didn't know.
Well, your force is right, but
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
So we are lowering the mens rea requirement
Yes.
for this charge.
Right, to change it to negligent.
Yes. Okay.
does everyone even know what that means? Or we're using lawyer?
Do you guys have a hierarchy of words? I just
Yeah.
realized
Yes.
that you
It
did.
just means the
You're on
mental
Jeopardy.
state
You're on
of your
Jeopardy
intent,
is
so,
what-
I mean,
So what, in the state, you have to know that you are unlawfully possessing something that doesn't have that has the serial number has been removed. And what we're changing that is to say you could just negligently, you didn't know, but you just should have known that your good was stolen or damaged and the thing had been destroyed. And so it's easier for our police and prosecutors to charge that person. And that's why I want to change some of the other language to give our citizens a little bit more protection from potential charges.
So is this something, and
I'm so sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Interrupt.
You know
Maybe
the
it would
word
help
hierarchy.
If I read the state language,
Sure.
it is slightly different.
Okay?
So you'll see our language, a person commits, if a person negligently possesses.
Yep.
The state language is a person commits the crime of unlawful possession if the person possesses a propelled vehicle, and then that language about the item is the same. Appliance, other article, component part, knowing that the serial number or identification mark placed on it by the manufacturer or owner for the purpose of identification has been defaced, erased, or otherwise altered with the intent of causing interruption to the ownership of another. So yes, the state standard, I would say, is higher. It makes it more difficult. to
It's
prosecute.
significantly higher because that last thing you said there basically means you have to know that it was defaced with the intent to, which means defaced basically because it was stolen.
Right. So, yes, the state language is very difficult to prosecute, which I think is similar to what's being repealed here in terms of
Yeah.
the difficulty of our APD has found in prosecuting that section.
And I am not, again, I am not opposed to making this easier to prosecute. I just think that this goes just a little bit too far.
And what I would suggest is then we need some additional language that clarifies it's not or and. It's got to be somewhere in between where you notify them with something sometime.
I think it would be change the and to or, and then let's define what notification is.
Oh, add a label. Just joking.
Define what it means to notify
California
law enforcement. Because notify law enforcement isn't the colloquial term of you're yelling at a cop car as it goes by. It is, we are going to have a process by which you notify law enforcement.
I got a lot of bites.
Mr.
Is
Trainee.
this only going to apply to pawn shop owners?
No, it's.
I'm asking because
Pop it up again.
you're talking about anybody that could not buy a bike at a garage sale if the serial number's been defaced, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Or untraceable.
Would you, when you do the S version of this, would you change the title on this? Because when I look at this title, I see must be presumed stolen by licensed pawnbrokers. For a pawnbroker, look at this. What do you mean? We're all
It's a
criminals?
different part.
Change your verbiage a little bit on that so it doesn't say they've been sold by pawn shop owners.
I don't know
get
that we
really
can
pissed at you.
change the title.
No, you don't
Oh,
need to
yes,
change-
you can.
You don't need to change the title. There are two. The title is two different sections.
The
So
only
there's.
thing also, Chris, if you would let me finish this up, okay?
I'm out of order.
I appreciate it. Every year we sell about 700 bikes.
Right.
We need to have something for the police department then to make sure they have serial numbers before they put it back out to
So
public.
we've already had this discussion with the police department, and effectively what would happen is they would likely license the same organization that does the auction to renumber the bikes.
And that's fine. I
Right,
just-
and so that
If
way
we
they
have that
can
many
be
bikes,
cured.
I want to be numbered. I want them to be numbered.
A bike without a serial number can be cured according to APD. And it wouldn't likely be APD doing this for lack of staff. It would likely be the people who profit from the sale of all those bikes who we would empower to make the mark.
Thank you, sir. I'll shut up.
Can I ask a question? I don't mean this to be debate, but I want to understand, because I think Forrest is right, but I want to make sure I get it. So you think that if someone who's missing ID mark has the receipt that they purchased that bike, they still need to notify the cops? Because that's how this is written.
No, I don't think that's actually how it's written. I think that if you had the indicia
is.
of ownership, you could
That's
prove
a
the bike
receipt.
is yours.
But it says and.
Yeah, it's the end. So
That's the
you
problem.
would
It
have.
doesn't say or.
I got my,
Anyway, I'm getting into debate, but
Yeah, you are.
Lawyer.
I want to make sure I didn't misunderstand.
Yeah.
Mr. Peters.
Thank you. So if you go to garage sale and buy a bicycle, you just ask them for a receipt, and then you're good to go, and it's the person who sold you the bike at the
I think that
garage
would,
sale?
I think that would count as an indicia of ownership.
Yes,
It would,
but
you still have to notify the cops.
if you don't,
That's
after
the
you
way
purchase
it's
that at the garage sale, whether you knew or did not know that there was a serial number on it, and if you do not inform the police at some point, you are presumed to be negligently
Yep.
possessing that item. And that is my issue. That's why I want to change the answer.
Well, so is there gonna be an online registration for people
No.
to buy bikes?
You don't have to register. We skipped that whole piece because people rose up in rebellion. But again, the problem isn't that. The problem is the other side. If we create a process by which someone can simply call the police department and then create a bike that is legal to possess, then we become part of the chain of the crime.
But
And I was gonna support
Yes, one
what,
more.
what Forrest is saying. I bought 2 bikes in my life, one with babysitting money, and one in 1984. And I own both of them still.
wow.
Okay, now, the one I bought in 1984, I betcha I can find that receipt.
wow.
But, well, and that's really sad, but I think I could. I think I paid $385 for it.
Wow, that's expensive.
Well, yeah, it was. It's a nice bike. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I don't think everyone. Did you just call me a hoarder? We were all
Are you
thinking.
planning to sell that bike?
I thought he was telling me I was out of order.
Miss Mama,
So
I
my
bet
question
it's order,
is,
ma'am.
what if someone doesn't have the receipt?
I will bet you that both of your bikes that you still possess from the 80s and in the 90s still have.
80s and the
The
70s.
70s and the 80s still have their serial number on them.
No, they do. You're correct. You're correct. And that's a really good point.
So here's where so it doesn't have to be a receipt, the normal indicia of ownership. There are other ways for people to do this. Like if you had photos of you for the last 10 years with your bicycle, you could go and say, here, look, right? And you could rebut this presumption of negligence.
So here I have it.
And
That would just show you might have stolen it.
yeah. But like in sort of the real world of way how criminal prosecutions work. But even if you had, regardless, even if you had those photos and you had the receipt, you are presumed to have committed this crime if you did not at some point go and affirmatively tell the police, notify the police. Now, Chris's concern, which I understand, is that if we do this, then all the people down at the wherever these shops, they will call the police and say, hey, I own this bike, this bike, this bike, this bike, and this bike, all of which the serial numbers are moving. And I'm arguing that that's not going to happen because criminals don't act that way. But also, every stolen bike, basically every stolen bike, the police have a description of it from the police report. And they'll be like, oh, this is the bike you're registering? Okay. And this is the bike you're registering? Okay. So I just think that is extremely unlikely. And what we should do I think we can resolve this by changing that and to or, and then let's work with the police department and create some kind of description of what the notification process is.
Do we mean lawfully possesses the usual indicia of ownership, or possesses the usual indicia of lawful ownership?
I think you're right.
I have a bunch of photos that I lawfully possess
The usual indicia of law.
that show that I.
That is true. That is true. No, look, here's where I'm coming from. Like, I don't want to. When we do criminal law, I think we have to be really careful about the language we use, because I don't want to, on accident, criminalize a bunch of people. And I don't mean that they're going to be like felons who are going to be rounded up or whatever. But the idea that now everybody who fits this category is now a misdemeanor, whether they know it or not, and that to me makes me uncomfortable.
I will add that the presumption can be overcome.
Sure, you are presumptive misdemeanor, but even that I'm not super thrilled with that.
But I would, I'll get to you 1 second during the next, but I would offer that if you provided a set of criminals a vehicle by which they could call a phone number and create a legal pathway launder their items. They would use it. And in fact, there are numbers of scenarios where that happens. And so while you might put it past the criminal class to get away with it, I would suggest they would find a way.
Are we here to a half an hour or hour?
Half an hour, one other thing. Chris, if you have another meeting like this, please invite the pawnbrokers here, because we don't have a segment here, but I guarantee you, the summit meeting
Is this about
will
pawnbrokers?
go crazy.
So, okay.
You wanna have them.
Here's a
come
question
here
I
and
have
talk.
before we gavel out is, so it's close, but it's obviously not quite there. Can we get it there by Tuesday or do we delay?
Well, I think you and I have to, so the ONS version is a relatively small amendment, but that amendment needs to be vetted by APD, because ultimately it's them who is going to have the notification process. You tell them what they can do.
They like this, and so, but I'm sure, the question is, can we do that by Tuesday?
Sure. If we can't, I mean, we'll put it off for 2 weeks, we'll pass it in a couple of weeks, but.
That's what I'm hoping.
I think you really should not have pawnbrokers in the title if you're gonna hold everyone else accountable.
No, there's a separate section at the back that
Okay.
deals only with pawnbrokers.
Okay, so, and the only reason I'm saying this is because, of course, I am not as familiar with all these things as you are. So I read this as a citizen or a licensed
It looks like it's
pawnbroker.
only you.
Yeah, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? So how can you show that in the title, or can you make the title less so that you don't need to be so specific? It's just a suggestion. It's just, there you go.
Well, I look forward to a wave of pawnbrokers telling us how evil we are as we figure out what we're gonna do about bikes that are piling up and we hope to presume are stolen.
No.
So thank you, and I'm sorry we're out of time.